No stars, just stripes. Let's sew. Playing with stripes. What can be more fun on a beautiful afternoon to just play with stripes? Well, a few rules are going to be really helpful here, and that's what I plan to do today. First, let's talk about the garment. And the garment is, as you saw, and you'll see again, it's a chevron stripe, and it's a cold shoulder. Those two things, those two great things for spring are combined. I really like this. So stripes, chevron stripes, and then a cold shoulder. The pattern work I chose, and the pattern work we'll do here in a minute, the pattern I chose is 113. I chose that because it's got a long base. I don't have to alter the base. If you have a shorter base, no big deal. You can just add length, and then it's got a sleeve. Those are the two things I need. So all I have is a front and a back and a sleeve. So for the sleeve, the first thing I'm going to do is take away the cap above the notches. I want the notches. The notches are going to be my alignment point, and I'm going to leave about an inch all the way across above the notches. But anything other than that, I'm going to fold back. And then because I only want it to be elbow length, I'm going to fold up the bottom. And if you're not sure, you can cut it longer and then just cut it off. It's not a big deal. Better to have a little bit more than not enough and have to cut a new sleeve. So that's my sleeve. That's my pattern work. That's all I have to do for my pattern work. Very quick and very simple. The only thing I'm not going to do is the front is going to be a V-neck. I'm not going to worry about cutting that just yet. I'm going to wait until I cut the fabric and then cut a V-neck. It's a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to kind of divide this into pattern and then fabric and then sewing so that we kind of all are on the same page together. I've chose a fabric that is a very thin stripe, because thin stripes are easier to work with than wide stripes. The wider the stripes, it just means the more exact my sewing has to be. And I'm going to show you that here in a minute. And then the other thing, the thin stripes, and you notice mine has a little asymmetric to it. Not asymmetric, but kind of inconsistent. It's not consistently striped. And that gives me a little bit of a break. I don't have to be as exact in my sewing when I do that. So the first thing I'm going to show you is what's wrong. So we're going to look at these little mannequins behind me because I took the time to kind of give you some visuals. The first one, what you can see is, or actually we're going to zoom into both of those mannequins, and what you're going to see with the mannequin on the right is that the stripes are actually going down. I'm going to kind of get as close as I can there. So placement on this fabric, and I don't care if it's wide stripes or narrow stripes, we need to be really careful because you can see, again, on the right, see if you notice from shoulder to center front, they're higher at center front than they are at the shoulder. And when that happens, you are going to look dowdy. The whole eye is drawn down if you notice. If you notice to the one on your left, notice the stripes at the shoulder are higher than the stripes at the center, and notice that it lifts your eye up and out. So those are the same size mannequins, same everything, except you can see one is going down and one is going up. Now don't get me wrong, this is a design choice. It's absolutely your choice. There's not a right and a wrong, but I'm going to tell you that most of the tops I see are done like this. In fact, when I have seen tops done the other way, they look really shorter to me. This stripe really makes you look shorter and kind of brings you more toward the ground. This stripe really gives you a lift. And so what you want to watch for is that the stripes at the shoulder are higher than the stripes at the center when I go to place the pattern. Okay, so that's rumor number one I want to clear up. Number two, many of you have asked me via internet, don't I just fold the fabric and cut it out? No, you don't. Because I'm going to show you. And I'm going to show you two ways to fold the fabric, and neither one will work. The first way is what I've done is I've taken the selvage and I folded it along the stripe, which is a beautiful fold. It's a 90-degree angle, perfect. But I've pin, cut. And when I open that up, that does not give me chevrons. That just gives me an interrupted stripe. So it doesn't work. Doesn't do it. It's not what gives me a chevron. So I did it the other way. I took the non-selvage and folded it to the selvage, which again, I folded along the stripe because you do need to do that. But notice again, I've pinned as if you would sewn, and you can see that I don't get a chevron either. I have a bias. The bias isn't on knit. But anyway, those are not effective, okay? So I showed you that just so that some of you can get that out of your head because you've got that stuck in your head. So let me show you how I did the back. And obviously this is the back that I'm going to go with because that's beautifully done. That's exactly what I want. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to put the back away because I don't need that. And again, I'm pattern number 113. Now, because I have stripes, and even though they're thin, I still want them to match. I want them to match on the sides. The sleeves are actually going to go horizontal. And I think one reason I love this cold shoulder is because it actually looks like it's an incorporation of the stripes that creates the cold shoulder. And I really like it. So the stripes are going to go horizontal on the sleeve. You need to make sure that your knit or fabric that you're using stretches both directions because you're going to need it. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the pieces single layer. I've cut 2 yards. And really what you want to think about it, whenever you're putting something on a diagonal, leave a yard for that. Even though I'm not going to use up the whole yard, I'm going to use the scraps for the sleeve. And then I did a yard for the back. And that will do almost all sizes. So I cut 2 yards to begin with. I've already cut my back. And here I go to cut the front. And I'm going to show you how I did the back. When you have this great ruler, is you have a 1-inch square. And what a 1-inch square will do for you is show you bias. So when you lay it down on the fabric, and I don't know that you're necessarily going to be able to see this, but I want you to hear this. You've got you're going to put your 1-inch square, and the top of the stripe and the bottom of the stripe, the same stripe, should be at the corner of the square. All right, so what that means is if I were creating a stripe that went right down the front of this garment, that this is my square, and this is my square, and this is my square. If I took my ruler and went from, if you noticed, I put a spot at the top of my square and at the bottom of, this is a 1-inch square, and then draw a line from that point to that point, that's my stripe position. I don't need to do that. All I have to do on my cloth is put down the ruler on such a way that one stripe this is here at the top of my square, and the same stripe is at the bottom of that square. And then I'm just going to draw a straight line. And I'm going to mark my fabric. And that's my bias. And again, bias is a word that applies to many things other than fabric. With fabric, on woven fabric, it's a weft and a warp, and then I have a bias. But contractually, in all kinds of things, we say I want to lay the tile on a bias. I want it to be, that just means at an angle. And it's got to be at an exact angle because otherwise things won't line up. That's the same here. So I've marked that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my center front. I'm not going to lay it on that line. I'm going to lay it at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to lay it on that line, but I'm going to add a seam allowance. So remember, in this particular pattern, the front and the back are cut on a fold. So I'm going to lay it 3/8 away from this line so that I get the seam allowance that I want in the front. Keep in mind as I've got it laid down, look at my stripes and notice they're coming from the shoulder to the center, and that'll give me this look and not this look, and that's what I want. So if my stripes don't match, it's because I don't have it on the correct angle. And there's no way to look at the fabric and say, oh, that looks good, that looks good. There's no way to know exactly what that bias, that 45-degree angle is. So mark it with the stripes. You got to have a 1-inch ruler to do that. And then lay it down. Continue all the way. I'm going to draw that just a little bit longer just to make sure I've got it right. And again, how I'm doing it is I'm looking at this stripe. And when it goes from this line to this bottom of the square, then I know I've got the 90-degree, the 45-degree that I want. Okay, and again, all I have to do on the first one, the second one's going to be easy. You'll see I'll do that in a minute. I'm going to lay that down. And the good thing about having a line here is I can kind of move this up or down according to how much fabric I have so that I use as little fabric as possible. And remember, again, the beauty of having a small stripe is that it doesn't have to be exact. And I know y'all can't see necessarily these right here, but they do not exactly match. They don't, because the stripe is small enough that you just get the effect of the stripe. But if it was a big wide stripe, they would they would have to be exactly right on. And then I'm going to cut my seam allowance. And then what I'm going to do is use this one. And when I use this one, and again, I'm not going to cut that stripe until I've made the top. And then I'll cut the stripe and I'll cut it to kind of follow the pattern a little bit. I'll remember V-necks. I'll show you that once I get it made. V-necks are not a straight line. They're a straight angled line. And so matching a V-neck with a stripe, it's got a few little, I shouldn't say tricks to it. You just have to make some decisions. It's not tricky. It's just more making a decision. Now, while I'm cutting this also, you're going to notice that the notch is at the bottom of the red line. So remember, my stripes are going to go horizontal on my sleeve. And so when I take my sleeve, the notch is at the bottom of the red. I'm going to take and put the notch at the bottom of the red. And make sure that I've got it on the same stripe going across. I do. And that's going to be my sleeve placement. So wherever that notch is where I'm going to line this notch, except these are going diagonal and these are going horizontal, but these diagonals will feed right into these horizontals as long as I've got those two placements. And I could cut this out both layers together. I don't think it'd be a big deal. I'm going to move it up to where I'm going to cut them single. You'll probably save a little bit of fabric with all this cutting if you cut them out single layer, but that's kind of your call. This stripe will not ruin your diagonal. A lot of people said to me, well, I don't want to put a stripe in my diagonal. You really don't see it at all. I mean, obviously at the end, we'll show it to you and you can be the ones who decide. I would rather have a stripe in my diagonal than have a lousy fitting shirt. So that's just me. But again, it's your t-shirt, your choice. All right, so when I look at this and I take this away, you can see that my stripe is more at an angle than what it's going to go into that neckline. So if I took a point to make this a V-neck, I would cut off quite a bit of shoulder. So I'm actually going to just take a little bit here, and it's just going to be a real slight V. And it doesn't follow the lines on both sides, but it will look like a V. So all I took off is just this little tiny bit from it being a rounded neck to being a V-neck. It definitely looks more like a V. I just took off the corner of this pattern of this front right here. And now what we're going to do, well, we'll cut the sleeve and then we'll lay this out to cut the next piece so that you'll see how to lay that out. Okay, those are both at the bottom of the red line. I can look across the bottom of this sleeve and it's straight, which that's important too. Stripes are definitely, they're fun. There's just a couple rules, that's all. But they really are fun to use. And I really like this chevron top with this cold shoulder. I think it's a cute combination. Whenever you're cutting stripes, and if you're deciding to cut them single layer, I always just use that piece for the next pattern piece. So let's move this. Let's cut the other front. And remember that there's always two ways to lay it when you're doing stripes, but I'm going to lay it with the stripes coming toward the front. So you look at you put it this way because the stripes are highest at the shoulder and coming lower to the center front. And I'm going to match these. So the first place I'm going to match them is at the center. And then clearly, so that they match the back, the more important place to match them is the sides. That's really going to determine the angle that you've got your whole piece on. And again, when we look at these, we can see that these stripes are coming from the shoulder toward center front. And that's what I want. And that looks like it's good. Just double check, make sure these stripes match here to those stripes to the side. Now, a little bit up here, you can see that it's a little bit different angle than what's down here. These are the stripes I'm going to go with, not necessarily these, when it comes to the back, because this underneath your arm is not a place that's going to be highly visible. At the side seam, it's going to be more visible. So I'm going to choose to actually match them when I go to sew here and here. When I have a very little stripe, they'll match in both places. If I had a really wide stripe, I would have to do a little bit of kind of adjusting to make sure they were right. But for now, it's going to be okay. All right, so I'm going to cut the other sleeve. Let's go sew. Let's go create this fun top. And it's just fun to play with stripes. There's so many fun things. But that whole bias thing, I hope you understand that. Bias is a 45-degree angle. Knit itself does not have a bias. But when I go to use the beauty of the stripe, and when I want that stripe to match, then I have to use the bias of the stripe. I hope I said that clearly enough. All right, so let's cut it and let's get going. And we're all done. The difference from the bolt to me is that I match. I match in the front, I match on the sides, I even match in the back. So doing that 1 square inch like I showed you, you can match all the way around. But if you don't follow that, then they won't match up. They'll match up in some places, but not in other places, and you'll know why. And then with the cold shoulder, you can make it as cold as you want or as warm as you want. Because remember, I lined it up at the notch. And so you can actually cover up more if you want. You can just leave a little bit at the top. You can do whatever. That's what I love about sewing. You get to do whatever you want. So from a warm-hearted, cold-shouldered to you, happy striping sewing from Silhouette Patterns.